Hello everyone. Today we have Miss Gauri Gupta with us. She is blessed with the various skills which most of us might not have been blessed with. She is an advocate, a writer, an illustrator, and a public speaker. Ma'am, the other day I just came across this article from UNESCO. It was mentioning something related to education policy about the children. So during this COVID-19 pandemic, education has really affected a lot. It has worsened the systems of education for children. And the worst affected among these are the children with disabilities. So let's refer to them as CWDs for now. Despite a legislative framework of protecting the right to education for all children, one-fourth of the children between CWDs of the year 5 to 19 years and the three-fourths of 5-year-olds are not enrolled in any formal section of education. What would you like to say about this?
So it's been around 2 years since everything has sort of shifted online, right? Schools, colleges, even work, everything is happening online.
Yeah.
So when it comes to children with disabilities, that is an aspect that most of us don't see, right? The amount of dropouts that have been there, the amount of exclusion that's there in that particular context, that is something that's unseen, right?
Yeah.
So with online education, there are different kinds of challenges, of course, for different disabilities. Like it cannot be generalized, and that is something that we were not prepared for,
Yeah, definitely.
right? Schools, we don't have the right kind of accommodation that's there. So of course there is a rise in number of dropouts because of course lack of availabilities of facilities, lack of accommodation, and lack of inclusion. All of these factors combined.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's there as well. Yeah.
So,
What are
ma'am,
your thoughts? I would love to know that.
of course, ma'am, COVID-19 pandemic has affected quite a lot in every sector, let it be the tertiary sector of education. Now, it has got worsened, but moderately because of some foundations, some NGOs, some children at least are now able to take the right to education.
Absolutely.
Would you like to tell our audience something about what do you mean by exclusion and inclusion of the children?
Okay. So I am a person with disability. Let's assume that I am maybe a sixth standard or a seventh standard student, right? I go to a school and I demand for admission in a very fancy, uh, renowned institution. I go there and I say, see, I have my grades and I want an admission in your institution. Everything just like any other non-student, non-disabled student would do, right? So I go there. They say, okay, that's all good, great, but we can't have you here because you're not normal. If I go there and they tell me that you don't belong in a school that's meant for normal kids, right,
Yeah,
or non-students with disabilities, so that's exclusion. Whereas basically what their implication is that that I don't belong in their environment and that I should go maybe in a school that's made for uh, students with disabilities specifically or not study altogether. That's their implication, right? So the other side of it, inclusion, whereas if let's say I go to a school again and they say, okay, we don't have the accommodation, we'll make it for you. Okay, we may not have a special educator, but we'll train our staff accordingly, right? As per your needs.
yeah,
Third, we have the accommodation and you're free to join us, right? So that's inclusion. You are including, you're making your environment more inclusive. You don't segregate between normal and not normal. So that's inclusion and exclusion for you.
yes, ma'am.
This is specific to the context of school education because that's what we are going to be
Yeah,
specifically talking about, right?
yes, ma'am. So, when discussing about inclusion, most would agree that universal access to education is prerequisite. But there is less consensus on what else it means to achieve inclusion in education for the learners with disabilities.
See, when we talk about inclusion, as I said, we have all the laws and regulations and all the rules. Everything is there in place. But if we still have this first thing is the mindset, right?
Yeah,
Principals have told me that I don't belong in their environment. Now, I'll share some of my experiences. When I was, I think, 11 years old, something like that, I was in a specific school which was very renowned in Delhi at that time, and teachers were the attitude that was there. They had all the facilities. They had lifts, they had ramps, they had one more student with disabilities. I'm not wrong.
Okay.
So everything was in place except their attitudes. And of course, we neglect the fact that mental health of students with disabilities is more prone to getting affected because of
Definitely.
the first the lack of diversity. I studied in three schools, and I remember being the only person with disability in my classroom in all three of them throughout the year, right? And the lack of diversity sort of made me feel that I would never be able to fit in, right? So that's there. Of course, that has a huge impact on my mental health. But disability is not something that makes me unique in terms of having something extra special, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it makes me me.
So, what could be the challenges faced by the students, the teachers, the caregivers, and government officials, as well as what are the limitations and modes of education instruction used during the pandemic?
In pandemic situation, first of all, if I talk about the initial part of it, initial year, we were not prepared. Everything happened all of a sudden. We all shifted online.
Yes.
And students with disabilities, especially those with, hearing impairments or those with visual impairments or those with invisible disabilities, intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, they were vastly affected. Why is that? Because we didn't have the right kind of accommodation. Now, you and I am a person with orthopedic disability, right? So I can go switch on my laptop and attend my classes at ease. But those with intellectual disabilities, learning disabilities, the challenges are there in a different form, right? How many of our online classes do you think we have ISL interpreters and all of these things? Do you think any school, most of the schools, are we investing in that sort of resources
I don't
if we
really,
are having online education
I don't really think,
only?
yeah,
We haven't even thought of it that we need one sign language interpreter in our class or we need a special educator for students with learning disabilities. So that we need to shift to more inclusive platforms. We use PowerPoint presentations, but do we have descriptions for it in our online classes, specifically for children? And then, of course, there are intersections as well. Those belonging to maybe rural communities or slightly underprivileged sections of the society, they may not have access to all of these resources easily, right?
yeah,
So that's there as well. And if I talk about the pre-pandemic situation, I believe there is a lack of diversity in our classrooms. How many students with disabilities have learning or invisible disabilities that go unidentified? The problem that's there on the administrative front, the policies are there, but the execution is not up to the mark. In three schools, neither of them had an accessible washroom. Now, if I go by statistics, if I'm not wrong, less than 40% of our schools in our country, mind you, in our country, are accessible to a certain extent. For us, accessibility would be one ramp at the entrance.
yeah.
And out of this 40%, only 17% have an accessible washroom. If I talk about the challenges that are there from the end of caregivers or parents, first, we are not aware of our rights. Secondly, now if I talk about online education, I know so many people with disabilities whose parents are attending online classes on behalf of them, giving online exams. Do you think that's fair? Do you think that's education, or is it just handing out report cards to, for exams?
Ma'am, in context to this, what do you feel is more beneficial, exclusiveness or inclusiveness?
I am personally an advocate for inclusion.
Okay.
While there is nothing wrong with having specific institutions for, students with specific disabilities, let's say we have blind schools and all of these
Yeah.
institutions, that's perfectly all right. I believe that our regular classrooms, first of all, we need to change our definition of normal. I would ask you one question: what is normal for you? What do you mean by normal? Yeah.
Something that
Anything
we
that comes to your
see
mind.
around us, that we have grown up seeing around us, eventually tends to become normal. Yeah.
For you, you walk on two legs, and that's normal for you. And I use a wheelchair that has four wheels. That's normal for me. Malab,
Huh.
is my definition of normal wrong, or is
Not at
yours
all.
wrong? No, no, right? The similar thing that that's everywhere around us, that's normative. That's following a norm, right? So that's not normal. Normal is very fluid. Normal is not a static word.
Hmm.
Normal is not something that has a fixed definition. What could be normal for you could be also normal for me,
Yeah.
right? So we need to first of all change this definition of normal. And if I talk about why I'm advocating for inclusion, that's because of the fact that we already have, let's say, 10 or 12. I don't want to go into any specific numbers. We have enough institutions, we have enough schools in our society. Why not make it more diverse? Why not make it more inclusive? Because I personally believe if I want to bridge the gap between, students with disabilities and those without disabilities, creating exclusive institutions is not going to help. We need to have more diverse environments where everybody coexists. We are more accommodating. We are more inclusive, right?
Yes.
So that's something that I strongly believe in. So I would say long term में inclusion is more beneficial
Okay.
in order to create a society where we all coexist. Because see, if you travel, let's say if you use a road, you won't have two separate roads, right? For those with disabilities and those without disabilities.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we are going to travel on the same road. We are going to work in the same workplaces and all of these things, right? That's not going to change. So why not start from the very beginning? Why not primary schools, pre-primary schools, all of these things? Why not have more diversity? Why not have more? Why not have at least two or three students who are disabled, whether visible or not visible in our classroom? So yeah, that's something that I strongly believe in.
Yes, ma'am. Any last message that you would like to share with the audience?
Last message, nothing like that. Just let's redefine our normal and let's just coexist together. And of course, inclusion is not the same as access, as I keep repeating.